Hey guys, tonight we drift into the misty folds of the Philippine archipelago, back before the Spanish arrived, before Catholic cathedrals dotted the coastlines, before white gowns and laced veils became standard issue. You find yourself standing barefoot on damp earth, somewhere in a coastal bar, surrounded by the sound of bamboo gongs, waves kissing the shore, and the faint aroma of smoked fish lingering in the breeze. Wedding guests were participants, not just spectators. You probably wouldn't survive the social pressure. And hey, post your location and your local time in the comments. I am curious where and when you're re-listening. It's wedding day, but not the kind you're used to. There's no walk down a carpeted aisle here. Instead, imagine drums made from animal hide, people dancing in looping circles under the rising moon. Here, in the southern lowlands of pre-colonial Mindanao or Visayas, weddings are displays of social order, wealth, and family history. No, she's draped in vivid reds and deep saffron, the colors of luck and fertility. Her blouse, likely a borrow with intricate needlework, is made of a beaker or silk traded through Chinese merchants. The sleeves puff slightly at the shoulders, and you catch a glint of fine gold thread woven into the seams. The bride's mother is dancing in circles, trailing a piece of cloth embroidered with shell sequins. Imagine arriving at your own wedding by Balangias, an actual boat with musicians greeting you like a celebrity. Beyoncé-level drama. But pre-colonial, she's performing the pangalay, a slow, graceful dance mimicking the motion of the ocean. Was that guy in red silk a D2's son or just borrowing from his cousin? The sources leave room for speculation. It's mesmerizing. You almost forget your feet are sinking slowly into the sand. Necklaces layered like a warrior's armor, clinking with every breath. And it wasn't just vanity. Some of these items were meant to ward off spirits or signal readiness for parenthood. You'd be surprised how many ways you can turn a necklace into a declaration of intent. It's lightweight, but crisp, clearly reserved for very special occasions. The clothing, it speaks volumes if you know how to listen. The tropics demand clothes that let the wind in and the sweat out. You notice how people here wrap, tie, and fold fabric instead of stitching it rigidly. And in that slow breath of wind passing through the silk canopy above, you realize no one here just puts something on. Every layer wraps around a story. The art of dressing in layers, sashes, and folds meant that nothing was too tight, and everything could double as a fan, a sling, or if things got dramatic, a cape. In some barangays, it was expected for attendees to wear their best cloth, not just out of respect, but to showcase their alliances. Gifts are exchanged, not rings, but tokens, rice, bracelets, weapons, beads. But for now, the garments do most of the talking. They declare honor, lineage, affection, ambition. They are stitched with meaning and maybe even magic. A rooster is released. It flaps once, then scurries toward the altar. Apparently, this is a good sign. You might spot someone in a colorful patadong, a wraparound skirt that seems to shimmer in the sun, and someone else with bright Hiligaynon embroidery stitched into their top. If they're wearing tenalak, that rare hand-woven dream pattern cloth of the Taboli, you better believe they've got clout, or at least an influential auntie. He's in a bong or kangona, traditional upper garment, paired with tight-fitting trousers or a bahag, depending on the region. The bride's armlets, the groom's belt buckle, even their teeth, yes, sometimes decorated with gold, pegs served as walking proof of their family status. These weren't just accessories, they were a resume. His top is dyed indigo, probably with thyme leaves, and he wears a sash with heirloom beads passed down from his grandfather's grandfather. On his neck hangs a pendant carved from a giant clamshell, said to bring fertility and good fortune. And somewhere in the crowd sparkling are the suit dressed in fabrics so elaborate you wonder how they even stitched them without scissors. And here's your first gentle reality check. If you were invited to this celebration, chances are you'd be expected to contribute like a pig or a bolt of cloth, or possibly just your best story about the time you got stung by a jellyfish and lived. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly through morning fog as the village comes alive with anticipation. Somewhere to your left, a child chases a chicken. To your right, old women are bent over woven baskets, preparing steamed rice cakes, dyed blue with butterfly pea flowers, but your eyes are drawn to the middle of it all. A makeshift altar made of banana leaves and bamboo, surrounded by fabric-draped posts fluttering in the wind. The wedding ceremony is today, and the garments are not just for show. Take the bride, for instance. She's not wearing white. Then there's the groom, who doesn't blend into the background either. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many pre-colonial Filipino communities, gold was not just a symbol of wealth. It was wearable currency, and the soundscape around you is alive. Bamboo gongs gondingan chime in complex rhythms. Now here's your quirky tidbit. It wasn't unheard of for the wedding couple to stage their arrival like a mini procession or even a boat landing, especially in coastal communities. The guests, meanwhile, are dressed almost as lavishly. Historians still argue whether these wedding clothes were strictly codified by class or more freely adopted across social strata. But the most show-stopping detail of all, the gold. Imagine hairpins shaped like crocodiles, nose rings dangling with beads. Now, behind the spectacle, there's also practicality. These textiles breathe. As the sun climbs higher, coconut palms casting long stripes of shadow on the sand, the rituals begin. Later, there will be more feasting, more dancing, possibly some flirtatious songs. You sit back, a little dizzy from the brightness, the scents, the quiet thrum of drums against your ribs. The next morning, you're still in the archipelago, still walking barefoot through the dewy grass. Only now you're higher up, maybe in the Visayas, or somewhere in northern Mindanao. With rhythmic, deliberate taps, the needle presses into the skin, leaving tiny beads of blood that quickly mix with ink. Each mark is a symbol of battles fought, ancestors honored, and now of a bride soon to be claimed. The air smells different here, heavy with tree bark and sweet coconut oil. In pre-colonial Visayan society, it wasn't just for warriors, it was for lovers, too. These tattoos weren't random, they followed a coded system. A bride might have ink tracing the line of her forearms, or swirling along her nape. Some sources suggest it was more optional than obligatory. Others treat it as a crucial rite of passage before marriage. Either way, you get the feeling that bare skin meant unfinished business. The love doesn't have to. Apparently, love fades faster than ink. Welcome to ancient realism. Children gather to gawk. Old warriors nod approvingly. The bride, just out of sight, is preparing her own display note of tattoo, but of layered skirts dyed in bold red and orange, colors chosen specifically to contrast the groom's indigo tones. This wasn't arrogancy, it was courtship, an announcement of readiness. Just a small symbol, leaf, a circle, a line etched, somewhere discreet, not visible to outsiders, but meaningful to them. The groom, now freshly inked, steps into a basin of cool water. His pain is real, but his posture is proud. there's a quiet respect from the elders now. He's marked, he's ready, like ancient promise rings, only sharper. And even though your modern brain knows you're only dreaming this, some quiet part of you wants a tattoo now, just one little line to remember this ancient love story. And in regions like Panay, grooms might also wear a putonga headscarf that, depending on its knot, the groom will don his finest. Tattoos on full display. The bride will shimmer with fabric and beads. But beneath the layers of cloth, of skin, of culture are symbols you'd never see unless you looked closely. And color told the entire village whether he was single, taken, widowed, or about to commit. Someday, he thinks. Maybe someday, when he's brave enough, but not yet. Together, they'll look like fire and dusk, standing side by side. These weren't always visible during the ceremony, especially if she wore a long-sleeved borrow or a full-body wrap, but once she danced, once the layers moved, the ink would flash like a whisper of thunder. The more you had, the more you'd achieved. And in the context of weddings, tattoos could act like a resume and a love letter. These tattoos were status symbols, honor badges, and sometimes literal invitations to courtship. Imagine getting inked, not just for beauty, but as a spiritual shield, a kind of wearable amulet etched into your skin. She likes him, sure, but her aunties are skeptical. So, what does he do? The tattoo session could take hours or even days, with the groom lying still while relatives sang chants to distract from the pain. Think of it as the pre-wedding spa package, but with considerably more blood. He reveals the newest tattoo, a swirling pattern across his collarbone, proof of a successful raid or trade voyage. It's his version of gainfully employed with benefits. Because if your chest was bare, your prospects might be too. A wedding is coming, but it's not quite time yet. The groom hasn't earned the right. Not until his skin tells the story. You pass a young man standing shirtless by the riverbank, his arms outstretched while an elder dips a sharpened bamboo needle into black soot mixed with sugarcane juice. Welcome to the world of Batak, the art of tattooing. Mainstream fact incoming. Spanish chroniclers noted with great awe the fully tattooed Visayan men, calling them pintados, the painted ones. Picture this: a young man approaching his beloved's family, hoping to be considered for marriage. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. In some accounts, grooms would be tattooed with specific symbols for marriage, itself spirals for union, animal totems for strength, and sometimes even star shapes to represent divine blessing. Women also bore tattoos, though theirs were often more ornamental and sometimes even ritualistic. Historians still argue whether tattooing was a requirement for all grooms or only a privilege reserved for the warrior elite. And it wasn't just about looks. These tattoos were believed to hold power, literal protection against evil spirits and misfortune. There is an elder in the village who laughs when you ask what happens if the wedding is called off. "The tattoo stays," she says, shrugging. As you watch the final patterns being tapped onto the groom's shoulder blades, you notice the audience. You begin to notice a pattern. Clothing here isn't passive. It declares, it argues, it even flirts. In some communities, men would arrive at a wedding shirtless, on purpose, just to show off the full landscape of their tattoos. Now here is a strange but sweet little fact. Sometimes couples would get matching tattoos after marriage. You move toward the center of the village, where the wedding platform is slowly being decorated with strips of banana fiber and colored shells. Nearby, a younger boy watches wide-eyed, one hand tracing the line of his own unmarked arm, and so the ceremony prepares to begin. You sit on a carved wooden stool and lean back, the drums starting to warm up again. The ink is drying. The day is beginning. The midday sun tilts overhead, bright enough to bleach the edges of the thatched rooftops and coax a low hum from the cicadas. You squint toward a shady clearing where women are gathering, their laughter rolling like waves. In the center stands the bride, not some porcelain vision in white, but a pillar of crimson confidence. In some lowland societies, especially among the Tagalog and Kapampangan, the traditional wedding outfit for women was a mix of elegance, boldness, and very smart ventilation. Picture this: a flowing patadong skirt or wraparound, malong dyed in deep maroon and burnt orange, paired with a fitted blouse, sometimes embroidered, sometimes tied off the shoulder if she was feeling particularly expressive, and beneath it all, loose trousers for freedom of movement, because dancing, walking over roots, and not flashing the whole clan are real concerns. These chants weren't just lyrical, they were coded with riddles, metaphors, and sometimes light jabs at the groom's cooking skills. Imagine singing your wedding vows and roasting your partner at the same time. Powerful energy. Was it your wealth that decided whether you wore pina fiber or cotton, or your island? Sources are fuzzy. During the procession, she might be carried, but later, these aren't random. Some were gifted by relatives, some bought at market, some carved from old bones or coral. Each one has a little backstory. One bead might be from her grandmother's own wedding, his shirt is starched, and his sash is tied a little crooked. Her favorite thing she found at the market last week. You can tell he tied it himself, refusing help. His bride notices, smiles, but says nothing. Instead, she adjusts the pin on her shoulder, the one shaped like a fishent, nods at the efficient. Another was found by the groom when they first met, and a warning to any ghost, gossip, or second cousin who ever doubted her. There's even one shaped like a lizard, a joke from her best friend about how she once fell out of a tree during courtship. It's all there, jingling quietly. No microphone, no speakers, just words carried by wind, surrounded by eyes, and held together by cloth, color, and connection. Her garments flow in the breeze, and as she walks forward, the layers of red and orange ripple like fire. Her hands rest at her sides, strong, decorated, and still jingling softly with each breath. She'd dance, and you cannot two-step in a corset. You need layers that shift with the music, that catch the wind and shimmer in firelight, clothes that breathe with your heartbeat. What's clear is that even the simplest of weddings had rich textile codes one's modern scholars are still trying to untangle from oral traditions. Her dress flares around her, layered like sunset clouds. Well, brides had their own version of statement dressing. Some would weave secret messages into the pattern of their cortina, long veil-like fabric worn over the head and shoulders. It was symbolic, a kind of power reversal, or maybe just practicality, if the ceremony took place on a boat or a narrow mountain path. Afterward, she might switch to a long rap or dance, barefoot in nothing but her blouse and veil. It depended on the weather. And, of course, her mood. In some tribes, that cloth might carry her family's crest, a symbol of the river she was born near, or even a warning to the in-laws. Be nice, or she walks. And yes, she's wearing pants under there. You heard that right. Ancient Filipino brides weren't bound by today's fashion rules, and modesty looked different across regions. Mainstream historical fact. Filipino women in pre-colonial times enjoyed a surprising amount of autonomy in how they dressed, and weddings were one of the few times this freedom got formalized. The materials varied a cotton traded from Chinese merchants, but the cut was unmistakably Filipino. Soft layers that wrapped and tied, never forced or zipped. Because, in many traditions, red kept spirits away, especially jealous ones who might linger near the bride's hairline or whisper into her ear during vows. And red was the wedding color. It symbolized joy, abundance, and depending on who you ask also, a little bit of protective fire. Not for sparkle, but for sound. Every step she takes adds a whispery jingle, a soft rhythm that dances with her. It is less of a statement and more of a spell, something to carry her through the ceremony with music at her feet. You lean in closer and notice something. She has got tiny shells sewn into the hem of her skirt. Quirky tidbit time. In certain coastal communities, some brides would actually sing their own vows in a melodic chant called ambahan. Now, remember how we said earlier that grooms would show off their tattoos? Historians still argue whether the bridal outfit varied by class more than by region. But here's what's not debated. The bride dressed to move. You find your eyes drifting again, this time to her wrists, where braided cords tie together strands of colored beads. Now here is a secret not many textbooks mention. Some brides wore pants only during the ceremony. The groom is now standing beside her, nervous but trying not to show it. You wonder, was that fishhook pin a family heirloom? A charm against bad luck? Or maybe just that's the beauty of this world. Every piece means something, maybe everything. As the ceremony begins, the bride's voice rings out not loudly, but clearly, and suddenly you realize her outfit isn't just beautiful. It's armor, celebration, identity. She takes her place. She doesn't lower her eyes. The wedding procession wins its way into the heart of the village. And as it does, something curious starts to happen. The line between male and female fashion blurs a little. You spot an elder uncle, respected, built like a retired water buffalo, walking proudly in what your modern brain immediately labels as a skirt. A man might wear a bahag, essentially a woven loincloth, for physical work or formal occasions, depending on the material and how elaborately it was tied. It was the Swiss Army knife of textiles. You could use it as a skirt, a cloak, a baby sling, a rain shield, or even a shroud. He's wearing a more formal version of the bahag, longer, dyed a deep green, with golden thread woven subtly into the hem. That way, the fabric of his bahag can be fully appreciated. There's no belt. Instead, the cloth is tightly bound and expertly tucked. Decorative pies often held ceremonial daggers, and these weren't just for show. A groom might wear his best blade polished, inherited, and pair it with an ankle-length malong that looked like a walking mural. Gasps echo around the gathering. But don't worry, this is tradition. It's a kind of sartorial inspection, a public test of humility. The groom must re-wrap his cloth quickly and correctly, all while smiling. The whole affair is tactile, adaptable, and deeply human. You don't just put on a malong, you shape it. A wind picks up from the sea, and the long cloth sways around their legs like underwater seaweed. The motion is mesmerizing, a visual lullaby. You wear it the way you wear confidence, softly, firmly, and with full awareness of the eyes watching you. No, you couldn't recreate this with modern fashion tape if you tried. They're expressions of strength, of adaptability, of a people who could turn a simple piece of cloth into 1,000 different stories. It flutters slightly as he walks. At first glance, it looks casual, even simple. In some communities, the exact malong worn at the wedding would also be used again at childbirth, at festivals, even at death. A lifelong companion dyed with meaning. Some claim it was purely utilitarian. Others suggest that Filipino society allowed for more fluid expression of identity than we give it credit for. The crowd cheers. The bride gives a slow clap. Someone tosses a mango. All is well. After all, if your clothes helped you do your job, show your rank, and survive the humidity, who cared what box they checked? But then he turns. and the fabric catches the sun, and you see the complexity in the folds. Each twist was deliberate. Each knot has purpose. One young boy tries to rewrap his, only to tangle it around his legs and topple into a basket of coconuts. Everyone laughs, including the bride, who kneels to help him retie it with surprising grace. She's done this before. She remembers being a flower girl once, all wrapped up and tripping every 10 steps. That memory is woven into today. This culture invented layering, wrapping, draper's style. You could call it island couture, and it predates Paris runways by centuries. But no one around you bats an eye. The patterns weren't just for looks. They told stories. Stripes for lineage, zigzags for rivers, certain colors only permitted for specific clans. There were actual rituals where male family members would gather and tie, retie, and perfectly fold the cloth in under a minute. No pins, no zippers, a kind of ancient Project Runway, but ways wherein the wrong Malong could spark a fight, or worse, a visit from your future in fact, his Malong, a wide tube of fabric wrapped around his waist, is the finest you've seen all day. Welcome to the land where men wore skirts not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Comfort, versatility, and pure flair. In pre-colonial Philippines, garments like the Malong and the Bahag were not gender-locked. They were practical, mainstream fact time. These traditional garments were woven with ikat or tie-dye techniques, often by women, and took days or even weeks to produce. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In some regions, grooms competed by how fast they could tie their... You'll glance at the groom now, and check this out. His upper garment, the kangan, is cut short, hitting just above the waistline. Historians still argue whether this gender-flexible dress code was unique to maritime Southeast Asia or more common across other ancient cultures. What's certain is that these garments were practical but never boring. Children weaving between the guests stop occasionally to adjust their own malongs, which slip and slide as they run. And here comes a delightful moment. An elder woman walks up to the groom, examines the folds of his malong, and with one swift motion unties the whole thing. He does. It's slightly crooked, but good enough. Here's a modern aside you might enjoy. If fashion influencers ever time-traveled here, they'd lose their minds. And yet, nothing about it feels rigid or pretentious. The sun dips slightly now, and you notice some of the men adjusting their garments again. You're reminded of one last detail. These garments weren't just for the wedding day, and in this moment, watching the fabric dance and the guests laugh and the groom still trying to tie that last knot just right, you realize nothing about these so-called skirts is weak or silly. The sun has tilted westward now, softening into that honey-colored light that turns even muddy feet into something cinematic. You're climbing slowly toward a village nestled in the Cordillera Mountains, and in the center of it all, a bride and groom who could just as easily be tribal royalty or mythic figures from a bedtime story. And you've arrived just in time to see the bride adjust her tapia-thick wraparound skirt held by a woven belt and tied with effortless expertise. On her head, a shallow crown-like structure made of feathers, beads, and sometimes even small carved wooden birds. She doesn't wear a veil, she wears certainty. So, some brides were subtly coached to fake a confident smile, even if their stomachs were full of butterflies. Emotional stoicism... But make it stylish. The beads chime with movement. Their placement isn't random. Older ones sit near her hips, newer ones closer to her heart. The symbolism's clear. The past anchors her, the present defines her, and the future dances near her pulse. Up here, the breeze is cooler, but not cold. It smells of pine, wood smoke, and woven rattan, a carved dog tooth. Maybe it swings lightly as she walks, and ganks a gongs, creating a rippling wall of sound. It isn't fast, it's steady, hypnotic, the kind of music that lulls your heartbeat into rhythm with the ground beneath you. She reaches up, unties a single bead from her veil, and offers it to the groom. He ties it onto his own sash without hesitation. It's a quiet gesture, but it's everything. A promise, a knot that will hold, even if the feathers fade and the tassels fray. And as the couple begins their ceremonial walk, slow, deliberate steps across a woven mat, everyone watches their feet. It's believed the way they move together is a sign, preparing for the next wedding, because even in a world where everything seems handmade and ancient, there's always someone thinking ahead. If they step in sync, good omen. If one stumbles, well, better luck next harvest. Cloaked in feathers, beads whispering secrets as you walk, and everyone watching to see not just how beautiful you look, but how bravely you step forward. In some traditions, these charms were used to ward off sickness or protect fertility. In others, they signaled the bride's family's success in hunting. Actual hunting, not metaphorical stock trading. She offers it to the couple, then pours a few drops onto the earth. For the ancestors, someone whispers beside you. Their steps are light, like they're floating. The air is filled with the scent of burning alimut leaves, used to cleanse the space. Someone whispers a chant. You don't understand the words, but you feel them settle into your bones. The couple drinks, their lips not quite touching, eyes steady on each other. The crowd watches, not judging, but witnessing. It declared your lineage, wealth, clan identity, and in some cases, even the dowry you brought into the union. Some believe the bright reds and blacks echo ancient Austronesian textile codes. Others say it's simply what the mountain spirits like best. Either way, the results are stunning. A single strand of heirloom beads could be worth more than a... And yes, it mattered who gave them to you. Grandmother, prestige, risky business. Everything is quieter, more grounded, until, that is, the wedding begins, and suddenly, the colors hit your eyes like firecrackers. Forget subdued This is a celebration, dressed in bold defiance. Feathered headdresses, layered beads that clink with every breath, textiles woven so tightly they feel like armor. This is a Cordilleran wedding. Mainstream historical fact. In the Ifugo Kalinga and Bontak traditions, wedding attire was never just for looking good. And the groom, you spot him across the clearing, proudly bare, with a Windsor woven loincloth wrapped around his waist, ends fluttering with decorative tassels. Across his chest, a diagonal sash, beaded with mother-of-pearl discs. His headdress rises high, crowned with feathers from the collar bird, a rare hornbill considered sacred. Those feathers aren't just for show, they're bragging rights, and acquiring them often meant risk, travel, or family inheritance. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. In some tribes, if the bride cried too much during the ceremony, it was believed the marriage would be rainy, full of hardship and miscommunication. You settle on a log, watching the last rays of sun catch in the bride's bead-covered belt. Meanwhile, the groom's mother steps forward with a ritual bowl of rice wine. Historians still argue whether the specific styles of Cordilleran wedding were evolved purely for ritual, or whether trade with nearby islands influenced the colors and materials. And here is a detail you might have missed. The bride's belt has a small bone charm hanging from it. There's music now, not drums this time, but nose. Flutes. A line of dancers joins behind them, and married cousins in matching bag, woven armbands, and shiny brass earrings. And just when you think the ceremony's ending, the bride suddenly stops. You breathe in deeply, your own lungs filling with pine and wood smoke, an old tradition. And just before the dancing begins, you spot something you didn't expect. An elder sitting alone near the fire, carefully stringing new beads onto a length of horsehair. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining yourself in that bride's place. It's early evening now. The clouds blush purple as dusk lowers its veil across the village. A light breeze rolls down from the hills, shaking leaves, cooling skin, and rattling the dozens of shell bangles clinking along arms, necks, and waists. It's the final round of the celebration, and the mood has shifted from formal to festive, from ceremony to spectacle. You lean against the frame of a bamboo house on stilts, watching the crowd swell around a dancing circle. She wears large disc earrings so wide they brush her shoulders, and a calambiga, the heavy coiled gold bracelet hugging her forearm like a snake made of sunlight. The Philippines was rich in gold, long before the Spanish ever dreamed of conquest. Gold was mined, melted, hammered, and worn not only by royalty, but by ordinary people who could afford it. And it wasn't unusual for families to bury their valuables, sometimes literally in their backyard. Yes, teeth, animal ones, possibly boar, possibly something else. You're too polite to ask. In the event of war or betrayal, you didn't run with bags of coins. You ran wearing your bank account. Bits of polished coconut shell were shaped to mimic gold. You realize with awe that her earlobes are stretched. So far they hang past her jaw. That's not a fashion choice. That's a life of commitment to beauty and tradition. The weight of status, quite literally. Some had a protective purpose. The bride's necklace, for example, includes a carved wooden piece shaped like an eye. Locals believe it wards off the Usaga spiritual sickness caused by too much attention, especially during big events like weddings. Think of it as ancient emotional sunscreen. Others had them tied into braids or mounted on woven combs. It glows, warm, rich, alive. People cheer. You hear someone shout, "The spirit's like that one." And in rare cases, gold nail guards were worn to elongate the fingers. Impractical, sure, but visually stunning. A grandmother with silver hair leans over, untying a necklace from around her neck. She wraps it gently in a cloth pouch and places it in a young girl's hand, maybe a niece, maybe a granddaughter. The laughter, the drums, the taste of coconut wine, the sound of shells clicking like cicadas in the wind, and in the dark, behind your eyelids, everything glows amber gold and softly echoing with stories you'll never forget. No words, just a nod. That necklace will be worn at her wedding someday. If you could wear gold and still prepare rice, well, that was the true mark of a good wife. Certain men wore oversized earrings or earplugs, not for fashion, but to make their heads seem larger in a culture where courtship and conflict weren't always separate. Looking formidable meant you might just get the best dowry and avoid getting challenged to a wrestling match by your cousin S. Her necklace hangs low, layered with rough-cut beads, mother-of-pearl inlays, and brass bells. All together, it sings a symphony of clinks and shimmers. You get the feeling jewelry here isn't just about show. It's layered in memory, full of stories, jokes, and sly glances passed down like heirlooms. All eyes fixate on the newlyweds, but your own attention drifts toward something even more dazzling. Not subtle rings or dainty chains. No. This jewelry roars. One school argues that bead patterns were passed down, clan to clan. Another says fashion played a bigger part than tradition, especially once foreign traders brought in glass beads, silver, and new designs. The bride is swaying in time with the music, and every movement sends a ripple through the golden shell that sheathes her body. Around his neck hangs a ling-lingo, a stylized omega-shaped earring turned pendant carved from jade or Shalan, iconic symbol across the archipelago. It's said to represent fertility, or balance, or a womb, or maybe just don't mess with me. Historians still argue whether the original meaning was sacred or just stylish. But either way, it looks great on him. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Filipino jewelry wasn't just for decorous, in it was power, currency, and armor. Tonight, though no one's running, they're dancing. The groom wears less, but not by much. He also wears armlets, etched with geometric designs, and a waistband from which dangles tiny bells and teeth. And now, the quirky tidbit you've been waiting for. Some warriors would wear fake jewelry to appear more dangerous at weddings. There's also one woman, a distant aunt, maybe, who wears earrings the size of saucers. Another auntie sidles up beside her, whispering something sarcastic about still wearing that fish pendant, and the two dissolve into laughter. You begin to see that not all jewelry was equally festive. Historians are divided on whether every piece of jewelry had a set ritual meaning, or if personal preference played a larger role. But the most dazzling items, always gold. Gold belts, gold diadems, gold hairpins. Some brides wore them across the forehead like a crown. The dancing speeds up. The bride turns in a slow arc, and for a brief second, the firelight catches her belt, a strip of hammered gold, scalloped like dragon scales. But the moment that sticks with you happens off stage, near the cooking pot. And that's the secret, isn't it? These aren't just accessories. They're archives. 100 years from now, someone will hold that same pendant. Trace the etchings, and remember tonight. So, as the dancers whirl and the jewelry sings its song of lineage and love, you close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over you. Later that night, under a sky sagging with stars, the energy shifts again. The feasting has quieted, the music slowed. Embers glow in fire pits, casting long shadows on woven mats. You'd expect the couple to be retreating into privacy by now, but instead, they're being called into the center of the gathering once more. Something's about to happen. The bride and groom step forward, and for a moment, the crowd falls still. No one's dancing, no one's laughing. Everyone waits, and then slowly, ceremonially, they begin to remove parts of their clothing. No, don't panic. It's not what your modern brain is leaping to. This is ritual undressing, one of the most powerful and symbolic gestures in ancient Filipino wedding tradition. Were they meant to ward off spirits by breaking continuity between the old and new selves? Or were they just visual cues for the community to recognize the marriage as complete? The truth, as always, is probably both. Grooms kept a thinner wrap beneath them along, not because they were shy, but because tradition required a moment of near-nakedness stripped of all pretensions, of wealth, of armor, of ego. Layers come off, not for exposure, but for transformation. Not for spectacle, but for sincerity. Mainstream historical fact. In several pre-colonial communities, notably among the Visayan and Tagalog peoples, wedding rites included the symbolic removal of clothing to mark a shift in identity. The bride and groom would exchange a single item of clothing, a sash, a wrap, even a hair tie, symbolizing not just union, but entanglement. From now on, your thread is my thread, your life tangled with mine. The bride is no longer her father's daughter. The groom is no longer just a bachelor, but the blanket now covers both sets of knees. And some local herb whose name you couldn't pronounce if you tried. The couple dips their hands in one bowl, then the other, not to clean, but to seal. The water will dry slowly, leaving a trace scent that lingers for days. A perfume of transition. They both laugh, and the boy's eyes go wide. Maybe he'd never thought of his elders as young, barefoot, half-dressed romantics before. And you understand? This wasn't about the clothes. It was about what happens when they come off. It's not just for the couple. It's for the spirits, for the ancestors, for the future children not yet born. Beneath it is a simpler garmenton adorned, homespun, cream. He bows, slightly not to his bride, but to her parents. They nod in return. It's quiet, respectful. The lavish beads, combs, pins, and feathers all folded neatly beside them. Someone places a woven blanket over both their laps. They're still separate people, but now they're also something new. Something stitched together in view of everyone they know and love. You can feel the gravity of the moment, even without understanding a word. It flutters high, circles once like a bird, and lands in the lap of a little girl sitting cross-legged by the fire. Everyone sees it. No one moves to retrieve it. Maybe that's how you know the ritual worked. Something let go. Something received. This isn't poverty. This is humility. It's a statement. I come to this union as myself. Nothing more. Nothing hidden. Stripping away garments meant shedding the past, shedding roles, sometimes even shedding status. It was vulnerability in its most sacred form. You watch as the bride loosens her belt and lets her upper wrap fall from one shoulder. But twice first, in public, to mark the change, and then in private, to confirm the union. The second version wasn't witnessed, of course, but its effects were celebrated the next morning. If the couple emerged in the same clothing as before, the elders exchanged knowing glances. Still deciding, they'd whisper. The groom unties his sash, slips off the embroidered kangan, and stands bare-chested under the stars. Now, for the quirky tidbit. In some regions, particularly among the Sabanan and the early this ritual undressing happened not just once. Historians still argue whether these undressing rituals originated as spiritual purifications or practical customs, and the garments themselves, hand-picked for this very act. Brides often wore an underlayer made of raw abika or simple cotton isli, slipped on or off. In some mountain tribes, there was an added step. One uncle chuckles nearby as he whispers to a young boy, "That's when your grandfather gave me his only decent belt." But the most stirring part, the silence. There's no cheering, no chanting, just a quiet rustle of fabric, a rustle of time folding in on itself. Then a sudden gust of wind catches the bride's valwat left of it and lifts it into the night. Back on the mat, the couple now sits shoulder to shoulder, dressed in their most humble layers. You can't help but glance down at your own clothes and wonder what would you let go of if you could. What layers would you peel away to begin again? A log in the fire cracks. Sparks rise like startled birds. The bride closes her eyes. The groom shifts closer. They don't touch. And just when you think the ceremony's over, an elder steps forward with 2 bowls of water. Then, with a soft hum rising around them, the elders begin the final chant. It's low, melodic, winding like a lullaby. You close your eyes as the last words ripple through the firelight. When there's nothing left but 2 people choosing each other, the stars above are glimmering now, sharp and clear, as if someone had polished the sky with coconut oil. Most of the guests have drifted off to sleeping mats or begun softly humming lullabies to the children curled up near the fires. You're still wide awake, listening to the low murmur of 2 grandmothers chatting over a bowl of tibok, some kind of creamy pudding that wobbles when stirred. And it's from them, not a scholar, not a book, that you learn the next piece of the wedding story. Because now it's time to talk about what happened before the wedding, and how you didn't just show up in your best clothes and hope for love. No, there was preparation, strategy, a little scheming, and, believe it or not, some fashion. The way you dressed before the wedding said just as much about your intentions as what you wore on the big day itself. We used to say, one of them giggles, if your bangles don't match your beetle nut case, don't even bother knocking. While love did bloom in many unions, economic alliances and tribal politics often shaped who got to marry whom. Still, those clothing choices, the carefully chosen earrings, the length of one's wrap, the amount of gold worn during courtship, Vizzy's carried weight, the other howls with laughter, shaking her head. If a woman wore black or indigo during a visit from a suitor, it might mean not interested. Perhaps she wore a different flower tucked behind her ear each time he visited, sending unspoken messages. Perhaps she chose a wrap dyed with turmeric for protection, or a blouse made from cloth her grandmother had blessed. These weren't just fashion choices. They were conversational threads woven into silence. They'd plan the wedding attire weeks in advance, sometimes longer. Fashion as superstition, fashion as legacy. Brides might choose specific fibers from a trusted merchant. Grooms might order a new sash in a pattern that mimicked his clan's banner or his father's war tattoo. If a couple was well off, the weaving alone could take a month. If not, old garments were carefully unraveled and rewoven memory repurposed into matrimony. If she wore bright red, it was interpreted as willing to listen. If she wore no jewelry at all, that was the polite equivalent of ghosting. Clothing tells you everything. Anakshi says to no one in particular how they love, how they wait, how they hope. Not just to impress, not just to sparkle, but to speak. And if he didn't know how to wrap his turban properly, girl, you marry into chaos. You see, in pre-colonial Filipino communities, courtship was a full-contact sport. It involved families, matchmakers, trials, gifts, and very careful outfit choices. Sometimes they were simple. Baskets of rice, bolts of hand-woven fabric, jars of fermented honey. Sometimes they were extravagant. Blades forged by a master, gold bangles, or a rare birdcage carved from a single piece of bamboo. And these gifts always delivered in full regalia. There was no such thing as showing up casual when you were trying to win a bride. This wasn't a casual visit. The men dressed in their best and so did the women. You might think of it as a pre-wedding mini-event with serious sartorial stakes. This practice, called harana or serenading, was equal parts musical performance and fashion runway. The suitor would show up in his finest malong or bahag, usually with a borrowed shawl or family heirloom for flair. And the bride, she might peek out from behind a woven curtain, wearing her almost wedding outfit, a borrow with tiny embroidered details, a belt made of layered seed beads, and her favorite scented oil dabbed behind her ears, just in case. Mainstream historical fact: among the Tagalog and Visayan peoples, formal courtship was often a multi-stage process, involving pamamanhi, or the groom's family visiting the bride's family to formally request her hand in marriage. The groom would wear his cleanest barong or ceremonial wrap, polished brass armbands, a headscarf knotted just so, and in some regions, even yasi, called coal or sometimes made from soot. It was used by both men and women to protect the eyes from glare and evil spirits. And bonus, it looked amazing. Now, for your quirky tidbit, in certain areas, young men were expected to sing their intentions while standing outside the bride's home, sometimes all night long. You lean in a little closer to the two elders as they talk about the importance of that pre-wedding look. Historians still argue whether all these courtship customs were as romantic as they seem, or if many were arranged behind the scenes. There was even a fashion-based form of subtle rejection. The bride you followed all evening. Her courtship story was likely written in fabric. And what about the gifts? Oh, The gifts mattered. Before any fabric was even cut for the wedding clothes, there had to be exchanges. And if the match was accepted, then came the tailoring. Yes, tailoring. In many areas, families would consult with the best weavers or clothiers in the village. You suddenly remember something the groom's younger brother said earlier, something about borrowing a cousin's belt for the pamamanhikan, because it brought good luck last time. One of the grandmothers finishes her pudding and wipes her mouth with the edge of her sleeve. You nod to yourself in the darkness. So before the wedding ever begins, before the chants, the drums, the beads, the blessings, there's a wardrobe being assembled. To whisper, I'm ready, I've prepared, I've chosen, and maybe, just maybe, to make sure the person waiting inside the house knows it too. It's deep night now. The air smells like damp earth and firewood. A soft shuffling nearby catches your attention. You peek, and somewhere in the distance, you're witnessing something rare. Post-wedding ritual dress. Clothing used not for display, but for communion with spirits, with ancestors. It's small, just a long strip of old abbey, edges frayed, stained with something that looks like turmeric. One woman cradles it, pressing it to her forehead. A symbolic binding, a whisper of lineage, a quiet reminder that this moment isn't theirs alone. Another kisses it lightly before draping it over the shoulder of the groom's grandfather, who's too old to stand, but still sharp as a blade. Some anthropologists suggest that the cloths themselves held no power, but it was the act of remembering that shaped the ritual. It belonged to her grandmother, who wore it during her own wedding. The neckline is hand-stitched in a loop pattern, said to trap good dreams. You notice how she touches it absently, fingers brushing the collar as if reassuring herself she's not alone. Others insist that the garments were infused with actual spiritual resonance, activated by repetition, reverence, and time. With memory itself, a spark leaps. The cloth is lifted from the couple's hands and folded again, reverently. The kind of gestures people make when something ancient has just happened and no one is quite sure what to say afterward. You realize that this moment, this wrapping of ritual cloth is their real wedding. The earlier beads and bells were for celebration. This was for the soul, returned to the lap of the woman who first brought it out. And with that, the circle begins to dissolve, not from their lips, not from the trees, maybe from the cloth, if not a house, or a gold pin, or a chant, maybe a simple piece of cloth, carried, folded, remembered. These were kept in special bamboo tubes, and only brought out for life events. Imagine wearing your dream as part of your history, of how every thread on this island might have a memory stitched inside. A rooster has confused the moon for morning. You're still awake, barely lying on your back on a woven mat outside the house, above you, but you hear someone murmur, "So the spirits don't lose him." That's enough. Some of these garments were believed to remember, literally, that if you wore a cloth passed down from your great-grandmother during a wedding ritual, the spirits would recognize you and come closer, not in the language of trade or gossip, but in something older, maybe older than words. The bride echoes it. Then the groom. Their voices don't rise. They blend. There are even stories quiet, whispered ones of cloths that grew heavier during ceremonies, as if the ancestors had rested their hands gently on your shoulders. Constellations you don't know the names of blink like slow thoughts. Around you, the soft breathing of sleeping guests, and the occasional jingle of a forgotten anklet left on a log. But just when your eyes start to close, it's the elders again. They're gathered beneath the eaves, sipping what looks like rice wine from carved coconut cups, talking in whispers and low laughter, and they're all still dressed not in the flashy wedding finery, but in ancestral garments that you didn't notice before. or simply the old cloth. Dull greens, maybe even patched, but their threads were imbued with prayers. These were pieces only worn during moments of transition, birth, wedding, death, and sometimes illness. To see them brought out tonight is a sign of deep trust and continuity. These outfits were worn when honoring ancestors, consulting spirits, or invoking protection for newlyweds, and they were not to be worn casually, ever. Simpler, but older, more worn, but clearly sacred. Tonight, mainstream historical fact. In many indigenous Filipino traditions, special garments were kept solely for ritual use. These were called different names across tribes. Baro Enike Ninuna. The cloth looked unassuming faded reds. Quirky tidbit. And right now, you're watching one such cloth get passed across a circle of elders. The newlyweds are called back not for show, but to witness. They kneel. The bride's newly unadorned head bows low. The groom mimics her, and slowly the cloth is passed across their joined hands. Historians still argue whether these ancestral garments had actual magical functions or were simply objects of memory and reverence. Either way, the effect is the same. Everyone watching holds their breath. Now here is a detail you might fae missed. The bride's underlayer, blouse barely visible beneath the simple rapai sentiha, and in some regions, like among the Bagobo or Tabo, post-wedding garments could include dream cloths, textiles embroidered with patterns seen in actual dreams, often by designated dreamweavers. The groom's ritual garment includes a red thread tied to his ankle. No one explains it. One of the grandmothers begins to chant. Soft, repetitive, gentle. The cloth between them seems to breathe. Then the fire crackles, and someone tosses a pinch of rice onto the embers, not with applause, but with deep sighs, hugs, slaps on the back. The couple rises. Their clothing is humble, unshiny, but somehow heavier, wiser. As they walk past you, you swear you hear the faintest whisper. We remember you. You pull your own blanket up to your chin, a little more aware of how bare your arms feel. And as you drift toward sleep, you think not for the first time tonight about what you would pass down. The next morning arrives like a whisper, soft and pink on the horizon. You wake up to the sound of roosters. Again, but this time they're right on time. Smoke curls lazily from cooking huts, and someone's already pounding rice a few houses away. The air is different, lighter. Somehow, as though something invisible has been released into the sky. It matters just as much as the beads and feathers did the day before. And Maranao, a couple's post-wedding clothing was carefully chosen to reflect modesty, unity, and preparedness. Brightness gave way to earth tones. Gold and shine were replaced with cloth meant for labor, not luxury. The message was simple. The celebration is over. The life begins. They'd appear at odd times, move quietly, wear muted colors, and avoid drawing attention. A cleverly dropped mat near the fire that needed to be cleaned up. Some claim they were symbolic of the couple's readiness to face real life together in ordinary clothes, doing ordinary things. This was a special malong or tapi, dyed with a stripe of guava bark or indigo, and sometimes embroidered with a small family emblem. Nothing flashy, just a nod that she had passed the early trials. She'd earned the cloth, like a quiet diploma in the former fashion. Others believe they were just nosy relatives with too much time on their hands. Even a rice pot placed just slightly too far away to be convenient. If the bride fetched it without complaint, good sign. If the groom washed his own eating bowl. But in the end, it's these garment stir work shirts, the wraparound skirts with faded patterns, the fabric used to carry a baby or mop up sweat that matter most. They're not seen in paintings or textbooks, but they're worn until they fray, until they remember your shape, until they belong to your story. Excellent omen, modern, clean, a little wrinkled from sleeping, and for a fleeting moment, you wonder if they mean anything. What you've earned in them, what stories they'd tell. Her burrow shifts as she moves, revealing a faint design stitched on the back 3 tiny mountain peaks. And you get the feeling that if you stayed long enough, someone would eventually hand you a cloth, a symbol for perseverance. You wonder who stitched it? Her mother? Herself? Was it added before or after the wedding? This practice, sometimes called paglalihim or salong, was thought to protect them from jealous spirits or lingering curses. His new malong is wrapped carelessly, slightly askew, like he's already forgotten it's supposed to impress anyone. That, in itself, is impressive. Like putting your life on Do Not Disturb until you had your feet under you. You stretch under your woven blanket, roll over on the bamboo floor, and catch sight of the newlyweds. They're not dressed in finery anymore. In fact, they look almost plain. His legs are muddy already. He's been up since before dawn, helping with firewood. There's a soft respect in that. No one expects him to keep performing. Breakfast is simple. Boiled root vegetables, coconut shavings, dried fish so salty it wakes your tongue. The bride eats beside her mother. The groom eats beside his grandfather. No drama, no speeches, just chewing, swallowing, life. But they do expect him to participate, and a simple Borothalus, wide-sleeved blouse you've seen before, but this one's edged with tiny red thread. It's said red keeps envy away. Her hair is bound back with a plain rattan comb. No perfume, no metal jewelry. Just the faint scent of river soap. During the days or even weeks when the couple is observed, guided, and sometimes quietly tested. But only at first glance. If you squint, you'll see it. The subtle symbolism stitched into every fold, because now we enter the final stage of the wedding tradition. The clothes worn after the ceremony. This isn't the honeymoon. This is the adjustment period. And what they wear now, mainstream historical fact. In many pre-colonial Filipino cultures, including the Tagalog, the bride, for example, now wears a hand-woven skirt dyed with plant pigment. The groom wears a looser bahag, one that allows movement for work. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some regions, a newlywed couple would spend several days hiding in plain sight. And sometimes just to make sure they were taking it seriously, the elders would stage little tests, a surprise visit to the couple's home. Historians still argue whether these tests were formal rituals or simply community habits passed down through generations. But here's something sweet. In a few mountain tribes, after a successful first week of married life, the bride would be given her first married wrap. You watch as the bride now bends to sweep the ashes from last night's fire. The groom, barefoot and grinning, walks past with a pile of banana leaves. Someone shouts at him, probably teasing, and he just laughs. You're invited to eat again this time, not as a guest of honor, but as a sleepy neighbor. And that's the point, isn't it? The wedding clothes are beautiful. The beads are mesmerizing. You look down at your own clothes. Then the bride glances your way and smiles, brushing a bit of soot from her sleeve. Not for the ceremony, not for a photo, but for living. By midday, the village is bustling again, not with music or ritual, but with life. Chickens squabble near the drying racks. Children run barefoot along the packed earth paths, chasing a ball made of woven rattan. You'll follow the sound of rhythmic tapping and find a group of women sitting beneath the canopy of banana leaves. They're weaving, and not just casually. This is focused, coordinated, almost sacred. You've stumbled into the heart of it. the cloth makers, the hands behind the wedding wardrobe, because none of this ceremonial fashion comes out of nowhere. Someone has to spin, dye, knot, and loom every single thread, and here, it's almost always the women. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Filipino communities, especially in the Visayas and Mindanao, weaving was not just an art, it was a deeply respected role passed down from mother to daughter. He pauses to watch the weavers, then nods respectfully and walks on. Everyone knows you don't interrupt the weavers. Certain clans became known for specific patterns or dye techniques. Some say every triangle represented fertility or harvest. Others argue they were simply artistic habits, like doodles. But when those patterns show up again and again in wedding attire, you start to believe there's more to it. Her hands blur as she threads dyed abaca fibers into intricate designs. This one, she says, pointing, is to keep her brave. The color, a muted, sun-faded blue, zigzags, waves, hidden faces. This is for a bride, she tells you softly. Her first skirt, the tubular garment, used by both men and women across Mindanao, is the Swiss Army knife of Filipino clothing worn as a skirt, a shawl, a baby carrier, even a sleeping sack. But this one is special. It has 4 colors: black for night, red for passion, yellow for joy, and green for rice. A cloth that's too perfect has no story. It's destined for a bride's mother. Every stitch was a decision. Every color had a cost. Every pattern told a piece of a tale that would keep unfolding long after the last dance ended. They pack their threads into baskets, roll up the dyed cloths, and sweep away the bits of abaca left behind. The bride gathers the scraps and adds them to a fire, where they curl into smoke and rise like silent birds. She's barefoot, smiling, and wearing what you now recognize as a transitional skirt, dyed with earth pigments, undecorated but finely stitched at the hem. A nod to beginnings, not flashy, but full of promise. An auntie chuckles, because upstream is harder, but it's where the good things live. You store that away for later. To be a skilled weaver was to be a keeper of history, and the textiles you created weren't just clothing. They were social documents, made by the Taboli people. This fabric isn't just woven, it's dreamed. You heard about this earlier, remember? It was believed the spirit world would bless the marriage, for which that cloth was used, but only if she interpreted the dream correctly. If not, the cloth might unravel. Or worse, the couple might start fighting over burned rice within a week. Dream weavers, mostly women, would sleep on mats near their looms and wait for ancestral spirits to give them patterns in dreams. A skipped thread, a slightly crooked line, these are left in as blessings. They call them spirit gaps. Tiny imperfections meant to let the ancestors breathe through the fabric. To close them would be to shut them out. They couldn't just invent them, the patterns had to be received. One woman beckons you closer. She sits at a backstrap loom, her body serving as part of the machine tension held between her waist and a wooden frame. You spot an unfinished Tanalak cloth, drying nearby, deep maroon with cream-colored tribal motifs. Here's your quirky tidbit. If a Taboli woman dreamt of a snake or river and wove it into her cloth, the groom appears nearby, carrying freshly split bamboo. Historians still argue whether specific symbols in Filipino textile traditions, like the repeating diamonds in Kalinga skirts, or the jagged mountain lines in Bagobo wraps, always had fixed meanings, or if they evolved with the weaver's mood. You sit down beside the older woman. She shows you how she dips her fingers into plant dye indigo, turmeric, beetaland, presses it into the fabric between threads. The bride from last night, her again appears with a bowl of boiled camote for the weavers, and woven into the lower edge A pattern of small fish swimming upstream. You ask why. Another weaver pulls out a finished malone, folding it with reverence. Even the in-laws get style moments. Here's something else. Mistakes in the cloth aren't always removed. The woman beside you rubs her thumb along one of these spirit gaps and smiles, and suddenly you get it. The wedding clothes weren't just garments. They were collaborations between the living and the dead, the weavers and the wearers, the seen and the unseen. As the sun reaches its highest point, the weavers begin to fold up their looms. You follow one weaveress hand as it presses a final thumbprint into the back of a cloth. Not for signature, not for pride, but for memory. As the sun dips lower, casting honey-colored light across the village, you follow the gentle clinking of bamboo pipes and the distant thump of a wooden pestle. But soon, your attention is caught by a group of men gathered near a low stone platform. They're seated in a loose circle, sharpening blades, polishing carved hilts, and quietly talking. They're not preparing for war, and when you see it, a set of clothes folded neatly atop a rock slab beside a set of ceremonial blades, but by their kin the brothers, uncles, cousins, and, sometimes, godfathers tasked with keeping the union safe. Literally. Not decorative, but sharp enough to split a coconut in half. They're preparing for protection, the subtle, often overlooked side of the wedding ritual. You ease down beside them. Some nod. One offers you roasted corn. Others point to oral accounts and early Spanish chronicles that describe wedding feasts ending in duels or ambush. Either way, these watchers took their role seriously. Another rap, dyed in banana heart and charcoal, was said to confuse malevolent beings who followed scent or color. He smiles, then whistles sharply, calling over a young boy, his grandson. "We don't have the shirt anymore," he says, "but this one carries the thread." He lifts the boy's arm and shows you a bracelet, tightly woven, dyed red, with a single tiger's eye bead in the center. To the human eye, it looked like any other cloth, but to a ghost it was camouflage, which meant it came with risks. Old rivals could use the distraction of celebration to stir conflict. There's a dark Penilian weave among them, dense, geometric textile common among Ilocano warriors. Another lays his blade down and places a small stone bead on top. Everyone nods. They know what he means. A ritual of thanks. The wedding is over. The cloth has done its work. The belief that ghosts, hearing the sound, would steer clear. If they didn't, well, that's what the blades were for. Like he's touching an old friend, another man reties his sash, pulling it tight over his waist. Not quite part of the ceremony, but never far. Not the stars of the show, but the frame around the canvas. And they, too, had their fashion, their uniforms of loyalty, of readiness, of quiet strength. The boy looks at you proudly, not quite sure why, but happy to be part of something ancient. Those were for joy, celebration, flirtation. The warriors wore earth tones, deep greens, dark browns, blacks. They blended into the background, always watching, never the center of attention. The groom's brother, dressed in warrior garb and pretending to nap, caught the thief before he got 2 steps. He didn't raise his blade, just stood up, adjusted his wrap, and gave a look that stopped everyone cold. You noticed his wrap is embroidered not with the usual fish or flowers, but with flames. Stylized, orange, and stark, fire to ward off envy. Next to it lies a sleeveless calisag jacket, made from woven bark fiber and dyed deep brown, lined with beads shaped like eyes. Symbolic armor. An angry ex-suitor might try to disrupt the event, Even malevolent spirits were believed to wander near during the emotional high of a wedding, so the groom's kin often wore warrior garb not for display, but as a message. We're watching. This is the guardian attire, worn not by the bride or groom. Mainstream historical fact. In many early Filipino communities, a wedding was seen not only as a personal bond, but as a tribal alignment. You glance again at the folded garments. Quirky tidbit. Some warrior attendants even wore enchanted anklets made of iron or copper, which jingled softly as they walked, not just for style, but to alert spirits of their presence. One man holds up a short crescent's serpentine blade, catching the light, and runs his thumb gently down the edge. Not threatening, reverent. Historians still debate how often violence actually disrupted weddings in pre-colonial times. Some suggest these protective measures were mostly symbolic, a show of strength to ensure peace. And the clothing they wore, every piece had meaning. You learn that one specific checkerboard motif in indigo and white was reserved only for those deemed spiritually clean enough to guard a union. You ask one of the older men what he wore to his cousin's wedding. "That's the knot," he says. "Tied by his uncle, blessed by the elder. Same as mine, same as my father's. And here's a subtle detail. The protector's garments rarely had bright reds or yellows until they needed to be. A story is shed over corn and palm winnebar. You watch now as one of the protectors removes his sash and folds it neatly, tucking it into a basket for storage. Then someone, an elder with silver hair and a voice like sand, says softly, "The strongest cloth is the one no one sees." You realize that while the bride sparkled and the groom danced, these men were the shadows, and maybe, just maybe, the marriage will last longer, because someone stood guard with a cloth on their shoulder and an old blade tucked beneath it. As the sun disappears behind the mountains, you walk back through the village, and for the first time, you notice all the watchers, men in subdued wraps, women with beaded hair ties that click softly when they turn. The sun has fully set now, and the air grows cooler, tinged with the scent of lemongrass, smoked fish, and something sweet boiling in clay pots. You wander back toward the main house, now quieter, but still gently lit with coconut oil lamps. Soft laughter bubbles from within. A new layer of the wedding world is revealing itself, something you didn't expect to matter. Not golden coins or ceremonial daggers, but textile gifts. Specifically, wedding clothes given to the couple rather than worn by them. And these, perhaps more than anything, are soaked in meaning. Gifts. These included baskets, tools, mats, and, importantly, cloth. A gifted malong boro or tapi wasn't just something to wear. Mothers and aunts would meet quietly to agree on what traits the bride or groom might need most. Were they truly meant to carry magic, or just symbolic nudges, like giving someone a mug that says, "Keep calm and don't burn the rice"? Then they'd weave the pattern accordingly, adding triangles for strength, spirals for wisdom, horizontal lines for peace. It was a coded message, a symbol of support, advice, sometimes even warning. It's placed into the bride's hands without words. "For when you want to make him laugh," she says, and the bride grins, already picturing it, but you catch a whisper from the aunt who gave it. "Use this when you need to disappear." It's not ominous, it's protective. A cloth to wrap around your head when you need space, when gossip grows sharp, when the world feels loud. She wasn't crying, just remembering. The cloth had served its purpose. A tooth bead here, a tiny bell there, a sprig of dried ginger tucked into a corner fold. A wedding gift meant not for joy, but for solitude. "This," the old man says, tying it around the groom's waist, "will remind you not to waste good mornings." The implication, A reminder to rise early, start fires, pound rice, fix roofs, romance, sure, but also responsibility. Not the loud, dramatic kind. From memory, from dream, from those who have worn love like a robe and folded it gently for the next soul to try on. Their tools, emotional equipment for the road ahead. No two couples receive the same set. One might be gifted silence and strength. Another, softness and fertility. It's like watching a library being handed over, but written in fabric, and a folded piece of blue cloth. My mama says this is for good dreams, she mumbles. The bride hugs her tightly. The cloth will be kept, the rock probably too. The bride kneels, her palms open, as her grandmother carefully unfolds her tapia rectangular wrap skirt. When you are tired of being kind, everyone chuckles. It's meant gently, a reminder that even the softest heart needs armor now and then. It's not new. The edges are worn. One corner is singed, but it's beautiful, patterned with spiraling vines and silver-threaded petals. Some are tucked under sleeping mats. Some are burned when their purpose is served. You can tell this has history, mainstream historical fact. In many ancient Filipino communities, it was customary for both families, bride S and groom S, to present the couple with practical gifts after the wedding. You step inside the house just in time to see one of these exchanges. The grandmother speaks softly, brushing the cloth once across the bride's shoulders. Wear this, she murmurs. Here S, your quirky tidbit. Some families gave sarongs, or wraps, named after specific Vatuza Malong, of patience, a borrow of courage, or even, in one recorded tradition, a skirt of silence, gifted to a talkative groom with a knowing wink. These weren't mass-produced. They were hand-sewn, dyed, and prepared over weeks. Historians still argue whether these named garments had ritual origins, or were later folk inventions that took on spiritual flavor. You suspect it's a little of both. The groom receives a sash from his grandfather. It's plain brown with one stripe of orange red running its full length. Another gift arrives, a headscarf dyed with clay and charcoal, tied with a loop knot at one end. Not all gifts are so quiet. A younger cousin presents a new melongrite orange with comic rooster patterns stitched into the hem. Even the children have a turn. One tiny niece toddles up with a tiny satchel of woven banana leaf, holding inside it a rock. You're struck by how these garments are not just tokens, and these gifted clothes, they're rarely worn all at once. Some stay folded for years, waiting for the right moment. You recall one woman earlier saying, I only wore my courage sash twice, once when I gave birth, and once when I left the house after my husband died. You glance at the pile growing in the corner, stacked wraps, rolled skirts, headbands, tunics, scarves, all with tiny charms sewn inside. Each piece whispers its blessing. Each pattern hums a promise. Each thread waits, quietly, to be needed. And even though the wedding is done, the gifts are still arriving. It's late now. Lanterns flicker low, casting soft golden halos across woven walls. The drums are quiet. The guests have thinned. Only a handful remain seated in a loose circle outside elders, mostly sipping warm ginger tea, their voices as soft as the wings of moths that flit around the firelight. And you're curled near the doorway, watching something so subtle you almost miss it. The undressing, not scandalous, not dramatic, just sacred, because here, in the deep folds of the night, the final ritual of the wedding clothing begins. The removal, folding, and storing of the ceremonial garments, a quiet, deliberate act, the opposite of the joyful dressing. Now, the purpose is not to show, it's to preserve Some say there were rules about which direction the cloth must be folded toward. The heart for joy, away from the body for grief. He unlaces the knot at his ankle. The red thread you remember from earlier and places it carefully into a carved wooden bowl, just lifted gently, like a breath being released. Underneath, her hair is slightly damp with sweat. Her eyes are tired, but she smiles. A younger cousin, solemn as a priest, carries the bowl to the elders. You notice she leaves a small tuft of hair inside, the bride's. A piece of her from this day, and you realize this isn't about tidiness, it's about testimony. These garments bore witness. Now they must rest, tied with a strip of vine, tucked into the folds like a bookmark. Others argue it was mostly improvisational, shaped by the women in charge, but the symbolism is undeniable. Folding closes the chapter. Mainstream historical fact. In many ancient Filipino wedding traditions, the garments worn during the ceremony were never reused for ordinary life. One by one, she removes her accessories. The bone clasp from her shoulder wrap, the beaded sash that held her waist, the tiny gold pin shaped like a fish that sat at her neckline, that by being folded and rested, they let go of their emotional charge. But if unfolded too soon, too casually, they might misremember and bring confusion. One piece, the bride's underskirt, dyed with guava, gets its own small pouch, stitched shut with coconut thread. It will be hidden not under a bed, but inside a wall cavity behind the hearth, warmed gently by cooking fires, surrounded by family laughter, until someone needs it again. And only those who had earned the right knew when it was time. You feel the tug of sleep, but part of you wants to stay to see where the box will go, what will be placed on top, whether someone will whisper a final thank you to the cloth itself. She doesn't just toss them aside. Each one is passed to a waiting elder, who folds it into a layer of dyed cotton. It was honored, folded into the life of the wearer, and given rest when its chapter was complete. One by one, the garments are placed inside, not stacked, layered, like pages in a book. Another woman gently brushes the skirt she wore earlier, murmuring words you can't catch. They were carefully cleaned often, with herbal water, then folded and wrapped in banana leaves or bark cloth. Some were placed in wooden chests, others were buried near trees, or even floated briefly downriver to release their energy before being retrieved again. It's not for style. It's a lock, not on a door but on a memory. To prevent this, people used not specific ways of binding the cloth to confuse anything that might try to follow. And before it's sealed, the elder who seems to lead the group takes a breath and says, "Let this cloth sleep until it is needed again." Not necessarily for another wedding. Sometimes these garments are opened when a child is born, or when a family is in crisis, or when someone dies. You watch the bride kneel before a low table. Here is your quirky tidbit. Some regions believe that failing to store a wedding cloth properly could invite tailing spirits, those that lurked behind joyful events, seeking cracks in the ritual to slip through. A man across the fire is twisting a strip of fabric into a tight spiral before tying it with a strand of horsehair. Historians still debate whether this folding ritual was standardized or if each community developed its own customs. You shift and notice the groom, sitting cross-legged beside the bride. The bride's veil simple lacy, the color of young coconuties, the last to be removed, not torn off, not dropped. The woman who removes the veil, the same aunt who gifted her the headscarf for disappearing, folds it slowly, corner to corner. You'll think about the way you store your own clothes, shoved into drawers, washed without thought. A box is brought out, not ornate, just cedar wood, darkened by time, with carvings of rice stalks and moon phases along its edge. Some are wrapped in banana leaves, some in plain cotton. Then comes the closing. The box lid doesn't slam, it slides. They aren't retired, just waiting. And here's something poetic. In a few tribes, there was a belief that wedding clothes, once stored, would begin to forget the person who wore them, so people waited. You watch the lid close fully now. The box tied shut with rattan cord, sealed with beeswax at its corners. As the final ember glows, you find yourself blinking slowly, lulled by the rhythm of folding, tying, storing, because if anything has become clear, it's this. Clothing wasn't just worn by ancient Filipinos. You feel your own limbs soften, your breath slow. Maybe it's time to fold your day away, too. The night is heavy now. Stars blink in and out of cloud cover above, and the forest beyond the village seems to exhale in long, cooling waves. Everyone is asleep, except you, still nestled in the shadows, still watching as the last flickers of the wedding's magic fade into something quieter, less festive, more sacred. And this final scene, it's not a ceremony, not a feast, not a dance, no audience, no drums, no chants, or wise uncles, or gossiping aunties, just the hush of moonlight and the sound of palm fronds brushing against each other in the wind. It's just a couple, alone. Because now, for the first time since the entire village gathered, the bride and groom are left to themselves. Known by many names, Hampe Sagabi, Damat, Na, Pahinga Pantulo Genji, Unangabi. These garments weren't flashy. They were soft, light, sometimes just repurposed cloth, but scented with herbs and worn with intention. And what they wear in this moment, it isn't silk or gold or spirit-dyed abac. She re-emerges a few minutes later in a pale wrap, edges trimmed in blue dye, her hair unbraided, a single jasmine flower tucked behind her ear. After all, wedding days were long, exhausting, full of movement and stress. Was this nightwear ceremonial, or just what felt best at the end of it all? From it, she takes a single red threadess, another one, and ties it lightly around the groom's wrist. He smiles, but doesn't speak. Then he takes a piece of dried bark, maybe cinnamon or camphor, and places it in a small clay bowl beside the sleeping mat. The scent is warm, grounding, familiar. Some researchers point to lullabies and nighttime blessings as evidence that even rest was sacred, not worn on the body, but carried in scent, texture, gesture, an invisible garment for the night. Others see it as folk tradition, shaped more by comfort than theology. The mat creaks. One of them exhales long and slow. A bird calls once from the trees. Then silence. It's the most modest garment she's worn all day, but somehow the most intimate, not because of what it shows, but because of what it doesn't need to. It's sleep cloth, a shared set. His sash is gone, his ankle thread removed. No jewelry, just skin, cloth, and trust. And how even the softest nightwear was once part of a sacred timeline. It was believed that wearing new or overly decorated garments during your first night as a married couple could confuse the soul, making it unsure if it should bind itself to another. To prevent that, couples wore unpatterned, even unfinished cloth, like starting with a blank slate. A garment meant not to impress but to receive. Mainstream historical fact. In many Filipino cultures, there was a special set of night clothing reserved only for the bride and groom's first shared night as a married couple. Maybe it smells faintly of rice and rain. Maybe it carries a story, even if you don't know the words. You glimpse the bride as she ducks behind a reed curtain. The village fades into shadow-gust silhouettes of thatched rooftops and quiet doorways. All the threads, all the dyes, all the folds and layers, They've done their work for the night. The wedding is behind them, and ahead lies only rest. The groom appears too bare-stayed now, wearing a loose sarong made from the same cloth you saw being folded earlier today. Let it hush the corners of your mind. Let the old weaver sing, faintly, far away. Let the threads hold you like they've held 1,000 before. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some mountain villages, you sit with that thought. Historians still argue whether the practice of sleep cloth was purely ritual or simply practical. But then you notice something else. Before lying down, the bride pulls out a tiny pouch. This, too, is part of the dress. And now, wrapped in these final textiles, they settle beside one another, and you realize you're the last one awake. The clothes have all been worn, danced in, folded, gifted, guarded, stored, and now they rest. Just like you should. But before you close your eyes, you think of everything these garments carried: salt, stories, hopes, warnings, jokes sewn into seams, dreams pressed into dyes. You remember what the weaver said: a cloth that's too perfect has no story. So let yours be wrinkled, patched, lived in. Let it wrap around you like a memory, and let it carry you gently into sleep. And now, finally, everything is still. The stars blink more slowly overhead, as if even the sky is growing drowsy. So you let your breath deepen. 1.2. In through your nose, out through your mouth, the rhythm of weaving, of waves, of memory. You imagine a cloth wrapping around your shoulders. It's soft, not heavy, not tight, just warm enough to remind you that you're not alone. Because that's the thing, isn't it? We wear so much, even when we sleep. The whispers of people we love, the dreams we've held on to, the quiet fabric of nights like this, when history feels close enough to touch. So, for now, let the cloth fall gently over your eyes. Sleep deep, and remember, even when the celebration ends, the story continues. One thread at a time. Good night.